Okay, we will go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today from communities across the country. I'm Lauren Galatly with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and I have the pleasure of working with 40 independent business associations through the Small Business Rising Coalition. Together, we advocate for a level playing field and for fair markets as we try to fix a policy system that has centered on bigger is better for decades. The organizations in the coalition represent over 300,000 independent businesses across the country from many different sectors. And I want to thank the 16 coalition partners co-hosting today's briefing. Um, the reason we're all here today to talk about price discrimination. I'd like to share a quick story before I ask our first speaker to join us. This summer, my organization led a briefing on price discrimination for congressional staffers. At this briefing, a grocer from Evans County, Georgia, named Michael Gay, shared the daily reality of running a family-owned grocery store in rural America. Michael shared at the briefing, "We provide jobs, support local initiatives, and serve diverse customer needs in our communities. But we can't compete when we're paying more for products at wholesale than our customers can buy them for at big box stores." The same scenario plays out in a dozen different ways across many industries. Large corporations use their market power to bully suppliers into special deals that are not given to smaller competitors. So that's the problem we're all here to fix. During this briefing, you will hear from anti-monopoly experts, leaders of independent business associations, a congressional staffer about an exciting potential bill, and then we'll take time for Q&A from all of you. So please feel free to use the Q&A feature throughout to submit your questions. This briefing will be recorded and we will send it out to you after the briefing. So first, it's my pleasure to introduce Stacy Mitchell, co-executive director with my organization, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Stacy.
Thank you, Lauren. It's great to see so many people on this call. I was kind of looking at the attendee list before we got going, and almost everyone who signed up are independent small retail businesses, which is really terrific. Exactly the folks we were hoping would turn out today. When I talk to many of the independent retailers that I talk to tell me that the biggest price problem that they're facing is price discrimination. As Lauren said, price discrimination is when a supplier charges small retailers higher prices than it charges larger retailers. And the way that this often comes about is you have, a powerful retail chain that goes to a supplier and says, "You're going to give us a better deal than our competitors." And the supplier is looking at that chain and they're thinking, you're our biggest customer, and we really feel like we can't say no. Like if we lose your business, we're really in trouble. And so the supplier will lower its price to that big chain. And then as it loses that revenue, it looks for a way to make up for it, and it ends up raising its price to the independent retailers even higher. And over time, as the big chains become more and more powerful through this strategy, that gap begins to grow and grow. This is what we have seen. And if you think about what this means, it means for the independent retailer that you have a much higher cost of goods. Your cost of goods for most independent retailers is, half of your expenses on average. And what that means is that no matter how efficiently you run your stores, no matter how smart, how effective your staff, you can do everything right. But that higher cost of goods to run your business means that you have to pass those higher costs on to customers. You have higher prices, and you have customers that may absolutely love to shop with you, but in some cases are going to say, "Look, I can't afford to pay more." And that means I'm going to go to Walmart or Amazon or Dollar General. Price discrimination is illegal. It's illegal under a federal antitrust law called the Robinson-Patman Act. Some states also prohibit price discrimination through their own antitrust laws. Why is price discrimination illegal? This law was passed, the federal law, Robinson-Patman, was passed in the 1930s, and it was passed in response to the emergence of the very first large retail chains. And what members of Congress at that time recognized was that if you want to have real competition, you have to have a level playing field. If you think about it, if you have a bunch of retailers, some large, some small, and they're competing, and you allow price discrimination, who's going to win? Is it going to be the best retailer, the retailer that has the most innovation, that offers the best experience, delivers the most value? Is it going to be the retailer who's most efficient? The answer is no. If you allow price discrimination, the retailer that's always going to win is the largest retailer. It's the retailer with the most leverage over the supply chain. So in that situation, you don't have customers picking the favorite and the best. You have the large retailers effectively using their market power to dominate, and that's not how competition is supposed to work. So that's why we outlawed price discrimination. And there was many decades from the 1930s all the way through the 1970s when we vigorously enforced the Robinson-Patman Act. In fact, the Federal Trade Commission, which is in charge of enforcing this law, a lot of the commission's work in those years was really dedicated to keeping the playing field level for independent retailers and other small businesses. They spent a lot of resources on making sure that the supply chain was fair. And if you go back, as we have done in some of our research here at the Institute, and kind of look at that period in history, what you see is just an incredible level of competition. More than half of all retail sales in those decades went to independent retailers. At the same time, we also had national chains that were out there. And so there was lots of choice. People could choose a local grocer or a chain grocer, depending on what they wanted. That kind of competition generated, it helped hold down prices, it generated a lot of innovation, and it ensured that every community, no matter how small or how low income, had basic retail services because it ensured that entrepreneurs that belonged to those communities could start businesses and actually succeed. When how we came about no longer enforcing this law really dates to the 1980s. And it was a period of an overall weakening in antitrust enforcement. And there began to be this idea, and it was, embraced partly by Republicans and also by Democrats, this idea that we should let big retailers really flex their muscle in the supply chain, and that at the end of the day, that this would be good for consumers. And it's no coincidence that that is the moment when we really began to see independent retail market share decline. And we see the explosive growth of first Walmart, later Amazon, and other chains that really learned that they could grow and dominate markets by using their power over suppliers to eliminate their smaller competitors. The good news today is that I've been working on this issue for a really long time, and I can tell you that for many, many years, there was exactly zero support among policymakers, among antitrust scholars, among economists for reinvigorating this law. But that has really changed. There is now growing support, partly because of the advocacy of many of the folks who've joined this call today, and because there is just a growing recognition that it was a major mistake to stop enforcing this law. I mean, if you just look around, what you see right now is we've got rising prices. Take the grocery sector, we have soaring prices in groceries. And there are many reasons for that, but one of the most significant is that companies in that sector no longer face sufficient competition. For a lot of folks, there are really only one or two supermarket chains grocery stores within their reach. And those major chains have the ability to elevate prices and take larger profits. We also see food deserts and other kinds of deserts. We now have pharmacy deserts. We have all of these communities that are missing basic retail because we took away the opportunity for local entrepreneurs to actually succeed in those neighborhoods. Under President Biden's antitrust FTC, sorry, here, I got a message popping up. Under Biden's antitrust, we saw the first two Robinson-Patman cases. We saw the first Robinson-Patman cases brought in decades. There were two cases filed near the end of the Biden administration. The new FTC, which is made up of Republican appointees, two of the three commissioners have voiced support for the Robinson-Patman Act and say that we should enforce it, but we are not necessarily seeing them follow through in terms of what they're doing. Of the two cases that were filed under Biden, the current FTC dropped one of those cases, probably the more important of the two, a case uh, going after Pepsi for giving illegal deals in the grocery sector to Walmart. But we have begun to see some movement at the federal level that's really important. There are a growing number of members of Congress, as we'll hear later on the call, who are really recognizing this problem and stepping up. I want to also say that it's not only up to the federal government. We also have state attorneys general who can enforce the law. Many of them are beginning to take a closer look at this. And we have state lawmakers also looking at this issue. We've got bills in a few states that are looking to add provisions to address price discrimination in their laws or to strengthen the provisions that they already have. And I just want to briefly close by saying that, if we think for a moment about what it would, to sort of imagine for a moment what it would mean if we reinvigorate this law, and to imagine the kind of renaissance that we might see in our neighborhoods and in our downtowns as we had local bookstores, local pharmacies, local hardware stores, grocery stores, now able to really compete on a fair playing field and to rebuild. So next, we're going to hear from several of our Small Business Rising Coalition members for a quick round robin share on how this impacts their small business members. So we'll hear first from Thomas Barr of Local First Arizona, and for Jordan Amaker at Low Country Local First in South Carolina. Welcome, Thomas and Jordan.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon where you are in the country. It's morning in Arizona still. Really nice to be here with you. My name is Thomas Barr. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives at Local First Arizona. We represent a little over 6,000 businesses through our online directory and the work that we do throughout the state. And I wanted to provide just one example of a really specific business and really specific industry that this topic directly relates to. And I think we're all here because we know the importance of independent and locally owned businesses in all of our communities and the impact that's had when we have fewer of them, right? We have fewer jobs, we have fewer economic activity happening in our local communities, all of those things. And the industry and the type of business I wanted to share a story about is in the pharmacy industry, which I would guess that some people here are familiar with. And I wanted to sort of talk about the relationship of pharmacy benefit managers and how that structure impacts independent pharmacies across the country. Really specifically, we work really closely with Melrose Pharmacy, which is right here in Phoenix, Arizona, who is very negatively impacted by the relationship that CVS Health or Caremark, which is a pharmacy benefit manager, has directly with CVS. So your pharmacy benefit managers, or as you might hear out there in the world, the PBMs, but I'm not going to abbreviate today, set the price points for which all pharmacies that they sell to can sell those drugs, right? So you think about it like this: CVS Health dictates what CVS can sell their drug price points at. CVS Health is also dictating for Melrose Pharmacy, an independent pharmacy, how much they can sell their drugs at. And they will negotiate different price points for CVS that are discounted lower than an independent pharmacy like Melrose. So Melrose has to sell their drugs, the same drug you would get at CVS at a retail, for more because CVS Health up here, the PBM or the pharmacy benefit manager, has negotiated a different price point for them. That blatantly right there is price discrimination, right? And so the independent pharmacy, Melrose, cannot compete because they don't get to dictate how much they are selling that drug to the consumer. Now, the pharmacy benefit manager structure is meant to protect consumers, right? Which should be a good thing, but not at the lack of competition that independent pharmacies cannot have within that same structure, right? And so these are the types of things we see across industries all the time, very specifically within the independent pharmacy industry across the country. This has been happening and developing for years. And if we don't elevate these issues at a state level, at a federal level, then we will continue losing our independent pharmacies, which provide really vital resources throughout our communities. I mean, we could look across the grocery industry, the banking industry, the pharmacy industry, and the depletion of independent businesses within those spaces is critical for us to fight for. So wanted to share that one example for you today, and I'm sure that Jordan has another great example on the other side of the country here that she can share with you too. So thank you.
Thanks, Thomas, and thank you, Stacy, and your team at ILSR. We are really proud to be Small Business Rising Coalition members in great partnership with folks like Thomas in Arizona. I'm Jordan. I'm the Director of Advocacy with Low Country Local First. We are based in the Charleston, South Carolina area and have around 700 independent business members in our network. And we survey our members annually, more than that, but one big survey every year to sort of gauge the pain points impacting our businesses across sectors. And for the last few years, we've included a question about this very issue. And for those last 3 years, the response to that has remained incredibly steady. And every year, 55% of those survey respondents have reported that they are either somewhat or significantly being impacted by their corporate competitors having access to superior pricing and terms for their products and services. Now, I don't want to sit here and think that every single one of those respondents understands this illegal practice and is impacted the way that we might think, but it definitely speaks to the volume of sort of concern we have about this issue and that it has been steady for quite some time. So I spoke recently with one of those survey respondents to learn more about his story. Coastal Cupboard is an independent home kitchen supply store and gift store based in Mount Pleasant, which is just north of Charleston's peninsula. The Pittner family opened up this shop in 2005 after previously owning a few clothing stores in the Colorado area. They sold in the 80s, moved to Mount Pleasant, got the retail bug again, and opened up Coastal Cupboard. Their son, Brad, currently owns and operates the shop. And when I spoke to him about illegal price discrimination and those impacts, he said, and I quote, "Well, it's nothing new." He said that to him, it just feels like this is how business is, and that you have to adopt and get used to how you get treated as a small local retailer. He said, you carry on and you just do your best. He said it feels like things have really pivoted for him with the rise of e-commerce and how now he can easily see how 200, plus different stores are charging for the same items he sells on his shelves. He said that it's pretty much a daily occurrence that a customer will come into his store and ask them to price match what they could get the same item at a big box store, and how frustrating that is. So to me, that's a major issue and gets to the lack of consumer awareness of this illegal practice, the need for more enforcement and fairness. To us, it's this sense of cynicism that seems to be not uncommon amongst our local retailers, and it's our hope that through educational opportunities like this and through tools like this fact sheet that they've linked to, that we can all do our part to learn and understand it and tell our neighbors in business about this, how it is an illegal practice. It's not just the status quo of how it should be, and fight for change. So grateful again to be a part of this, to see this momentum, to learn about how we can all take action. So thank you again.
Thank you, Thomas and Jordan, for sharing those stories from your corners of the world. It's really wonderful to work collectively with partners who are deeply rooted in their communities and have the interests of small, independent local businesses at the forefront. So next, I would like to introduce Katie Van Dyke with KVD Strategies. Katie's career as an attorney and advocate focuses on the importance of competition and how concentrated economic power leads to increased prices for consumers, depressed wages for the workforce, and the shuttering of small businesses. Katie previously served as an attorney advisor at the Federal Trade Commission before founding KVD Strategies. Katie will be discussing how to identify price discrimination and the different strategies available for us to address it. Welcome, Katie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. And thank you to our round robin table for setting this up perfectly for me to talk about. Because when I hear small businesses say that this is, part of just the cost of doing business, and they have to adapt and learn to live with it. That's why I'm here today, is to tell you, no, you don't. There are a multitude of ways for all of you that are on here today to fight back and assert your rights and enforce the law on your own, or going through your congressmen, your state legislatures, and through your government enforcement agencies. First, though, I'll start by talking about what is actually illegal here. So we're talking about price discrimination. And I think that when we talk about this a lot, we talk about the easiest way to identify it, which is when a lot of you see a product that you sell being offered at the retail level for prices that are lower than what you pay wholesale. That is obviously an immediate sign that something is going on. When Walmart can sell orange juice for less than you're buying it for, or Amazon can sell a book for less than you're buying it for. But that's not the only price discrimination that's illegal. We're talking about a multitude of terms and conditions that you're negotiating with your suppliers. It outlaws, for instance, discriminatory payments for things like promotional allowances. So payments for rebate coupons, payments for marketing. If a lot of times I know suppliers will pay retailers to set up end caps or special displays to promote their products. They have to provide those on proportionately equal terms to all of their buyers. It's also talking about services. Is one supplier getting transportation of a product for free? Are they actually getting the promotional materials like shelving and end cap displays and catalogs for free or at a discount that you're not getting? It's actually a very broad world of terms that affect you and your bottom line, and it is illegal, and that type of conduct should be addressed throughout when we're talking, and should be thought about when we're talking about what's going on here. Getting back to how do you enforce your rights? I think this is probably a hard thing to think about when you're just working every day trying to balance your books and negotiate with your suppliers. But there are actually a lot of routes here. First of all, we have a lot of trade associations here with Small Business Rising. You can go to them and tell them about the problems that you're facing, and they want to hear from you. I'm in Washington, D.C. People in Washington, D.C. who are working on this, we want to hear from you, and we can help you. You can write op-eds in your newspapers. And again, this is something that sounds perhaps like a large hurdle to get over. It sounds scary, but all of these groups are here to help you and support you if you want to use your voice in a public way to educate your customers about it. You can go to Capitol Hill. You can call your congressman and your senator. You can write them. You're going to hear from Brianna Walker, who works for a senator on the Hill about a bill that they're about to introduce. You can urge your congressman or your senator to support that bill. You can go to government enforcers. And again, this is something where your trade association or Small Business Rising or ILSR or even I can help you with. How do you get to your congressman? We can help you with that. You can go to the FTC and you can file a complaint and give them the specifics. Here's exactly what I know I am facing, and this is the illegal conduct that I'm having to overcome just to keep my doors open every day. You can go to your state attorney general's offices and file a complaint with them. As Stacy said earlier, there are also several states that have their own laws. In particular, you've got Arkansas, California, Connecticut, Kentucky, Maryland, Oklahoma, Oregon, Virginia, Wisconsin, all have state-specific laws designed to address this. And then most importantly, you can file a lawsuit. You can take direct action against your suppliers who are giving you unfair and unequal terms. And I know that sounds scary. I know it's hard to be a plaintiff. I know a lot of people worry about things like retaliation. There are ways to deal with that. First of all, I have always told my clients, just being the plaintiff in the lawsuit provides its own protection because courts don't like it when defendants retaliate against plaintiffs. There are protective orders that you can get, that your lawyer can get in place that prohibit a defendant from retaliating against you or a supplier from retaliating against you. And those are real, those lawsuits or those rights of action that you can bring are real and concrete. There have been several cases in California recently under the Robinson-Patman Act and California state law that have had success. They've gotten jury verdicts of over $500,000 before what we call treble damages, which is allowed. You can recover your attorney's fees, you can recover your costs, you can get injunctive relief that prohibits all of this from happening in the future. And so when we talk about all of these collective tools that all of you have, we are asking you to use them, because when you use them, it flips the risk. For the last 40 years, this violating the Robinson-Patman Act hasn't really carried much risk for suppliers. They haven't faced the threat of government enforcement. There hasn't been a lot of private enforcement. But when the drumbeat continues and increases and gets louder, that flips the risk to stop the conduct in the first place.
Wonderful. Katie, thank you so much for sharing all of those insights. And I want to share in advance that we will be sharing on this briefing a call to action form that we're hoping you all fill out right now during the briefing or when we send it later to you in your inboxes. And like Katie said, we're here to support all the groups. The 40 groups in Small Business Rising are here to support. There's a lot of people that are ready to help guide you. So next I'd like to welcome Brianna Walker, Staff Counsel for Senator Cory Booker on the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee. Brianna is sharing a sneak preview of a soon-to-be introduced bill in Congress that would provide greater resources for state attorneys general to take on price discrimination investigations in the states. Welcome, Brianna.
Thank you, Lauren. So nice to be here with all of you. Thank you for taking some time this afternoon here, at least in DC. As Lauren said, my name is Brianna Walker, and I serve as counsel to Senator Cory Booker, representing the state of New Jersey. Like many of your states, New Jersey is home to a number of small businesses, particularly independent grocery stores. These independent grocers serve as pillars of their community, not just providing food, but providing jobs, services, and providing stability for their community. Unfortunately, due to the dominance of a handful of grocery stores, these independent grocers are quickly leaving their neighborhoods. These small businesses are increasingly subject to less favorable prices, discriminatory terms and conditions, and suppliers often offer better terms and pricing to big box stores instead. Sometimes these retail and wholesalers may not even make products available to these independent grocers. This makes it increasingly more difficult for these small businesses to stay open, pushing many out of their communities or closing entirely. In the senator's home state of New Jersey, we've lost a dozen independent grocers in just the last year, and this is happening across the country. And even if independent grocers are able to stay open, they're often forced to pass along their costs to shoppers. But federal enforcers, such as the Federal Trade Commission, have the tools to fix this. It's called the Robinson-Patman Act, also known as the RPA. As Stacy said earlier, the law was passed in 1936 to protect smaller grocers from an increasingly dominant chain store at the time. The RPA prohibits price discrimination, charging different prices to different buyers for the same product. It also prohibits buyers from knowingly inducing or receiving discriminatory prices. Unfortunately, our federal enforcers have not done their part. Just earlier this year, as was mentioned, the Federal Trade Commission dropped their RPA case against Pepsi Cola, where it was alleged that the second largest food company in the world had engaged in illegal price discrimination by providing one customer, a large big box retailer, with unfair pricing advantages, while raising prices for competing retailers and customers. That is why it's time to turn our state turn to our state attorneys general to do the work our federal antitrust enforcers have failed to do. State AGs have done incredible work in the antitrust space, such as bringing lawsuits to challenge Kroger and Albertsons' attempted merger, which would have joined the third and fourth largest grocers. So that is why Senator Booker has drafted the Fair Competition for Small Business Act of 2025. The legislation would enable state AGs to seek monetary damages on behalf of their constituents, including small businesses like yours, for Robinson-Patman Act violations. By empowering state AGs to go after these big box stores, not only would money be returned to your states, but independent grocers and other small businesses will have the chance to thrive. It would even the playing field and help give everyone a fair chance. The Institute for Self-Reliance is an endorser of the Fair Competition for Small Business Act, along with the National Grocers Association, American Economic Liberties Project, Farm Action Fund, and others. We are hoping to make the Fair Competition for Small Business Act a bipartisan bill. It's an issue that affects all Americans, regardless of party, regardless of where you come from. So if you are interested in supporting this bill and empowering state AGs, I would very much encourage you to reach out to your senators. As Katie said, your members want to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brianna. I'm personally very excited about the opportunity that this bill, the Fair Competition for Small Business Act, presents for making these RPA investigations achievable at the state level. So we will send you more information on that. We are watching and can't wait for it to be introduced so we can all support it. You've also been hearing a lot about the grocery sector, and I wanted to note that this issue has really come to a head in the grocery sector because of the many issues that consumers and independent grocers are experiencing right now. But this applies to any retailer. The grocers are paving the way for action and doing really wonderful work. But we know there's a broad coalition of Main Street industries that are being impacted. So I did want to mention that. And now we are going to move to the Q&A portion. So if you have a question, please feel free to go ahead and drop that into the Zoom Q&A feature. I am going to ask Stacy and Katie to join me back on screen. And I'll note before I share the first question that we did drop that call to action form in the chat. That's super, super important. We really want to help share your stories. We'll only do it with your permission. It's a confidential form, but we want to work with you. So I will move to the first question here, which is for Stacy from Anthony on the call. How much of the lower prices at big boxes is the result of these illegal pricing practices versus them having economies of scale? And do you have any data on that?
That's a great question, and nice to see you here, Anthony. Yeah, I mean, I think there has not been a lot of analysis of this, and a lot of it, of course, is kept very secret by the companies that are involved. But your question really gets to, I think, an important thing to sort of think through. We've had this story about, this sort of story in our society about the rise of big retailers, where we say, well, the reason that Walmart is dominant is that they have these low prices is because they're super efficient and because they buy at such volume and so on and so forth. But if you think about it, that sort of the efficiencies are really there for the independents as well. So what the Robinson-Patman Act says is that you, as a supplier, are allowed to pass on legitimate savings from efficiencies. So if you're selling to a retailer a single case and you're selling another retailer a truckload, and you have the cost difference there, you can pass along those savings for the truckload, like you're saving overhead in terms of dealing with that. But at the scale that independent businesses are buying, often through their wholesalers, those economies of scale are right there. What we're seeing in the market these days is you've got a truck operated by a major chain that is backing up to a warehouse, and you have a truck operated by a wholesaler that sells to independent retailers backing up to that same warehouse. They are both filling up. That is, they're both buying in the largest volumes in terms of economies of scale, and yet they are getting two very different prices. And that's the issue. That's where we don't have a level playing field. So again, Robinson-Patman allows for legitimate economies of scale to be cost differences and efficiencies to be passed along, but most of the price difference that we're seeing is not because of those legitimate efficiencies. It's purely because of the power of one player to say, you're going to give me a better deal and you're going to raise prices on the small business down the street.
Thank you, Stacey. This one is for both Katie and then Stacey. This is from Bill. My biggest problem is Amazon, and I haven't heard anything about the fight against them in a while. Has everything stalled?
That's a good question. You're right. There is a lot of litigation going on against Amazon. A lot of it is more consumer focused right now, but there have been some lawsuits against them, for instance, about the favorable book pricing that they've received. That was not very successful. I think you are correct that did stall, but I think there are some other things in the works. Stacey, do you have any other updates on that?
Well, the federal monopolization lawsuit, well, I shouldn't say federal, it's both federal and state. So brought by the FTC, and I believe 17 states joined in that lawsuit. That is proceeding along. We have a trial date that is now early 2027. And it's a case that argues that Amazon has used illegal tactics to monopolize the online market. I think it's a very important case, and I think it's important to make sure that the states involved and that the Federal Trade Commission and that members of Congress who are keeping an eye on these things hear from independent businesses about how crucial it is to continue this case and to really see it through, because we really need relief from some of the anti-competitive tactics that Amazon is engaging in. I think there are a few other state lawsuits that have been filed independently, including in Arizona. There's a case, I believe, moving in California. So there are a number of different AGs, in addition to this sort of combined case, that are trying to address some of Amazon's anti-competitive tactics. And we're definitely hoping to see more activity in terms of price discrimination. In particular, because we know Amazon, in the book sector, for example, is getting very favorable pricing from publishers, that independent bookstores, even when they're buying the same volume, cannot get those same prices. And that's part of how Amazon has been so dominant in the book business.
Thank you both. The next question is for Stacey and then Katie. From Jennifer, how can retailers recognize or prove that price discrimination is taking place? What are some signs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, if you're going into a competitor and their retail price is lower than what you're paying wholesale, that's a good sign. That, I think, maybe begins a conversation with your distributor or your wholesaler about why is that different. We have found that wholesalers and distributors are often kind of key people in understanding what's really going on. In many cases, the chain retailers are buying direct, not always, but they're often buying direct from the manufacturer or the publisher, and there's a distributor that is on behalf, or a co-op that is on behalf of the those folks are the ones who are online and have we see a lot of evidence in the news. Like, you can see examples of Walmart basically, for example, the tariffs, when earlier in the year, when we first started seeing the tariffs come down from the federal government, Walmart very publicly said, oh yeah, we're not going to be accepting any price increases from our suppliers. You guys go figure it out. We're not accepting any price increases. And when you've got suppliers who are obviously taking on all of these additional costs, it's like, well, what's going to happen if Walmart is telling them absolutely not, and we're 25% of your business? Can you imagine? One customer is 25% of your business. You're not going to go against them. What are you going to do? You're going to pass it on to other players in the channel. The last thing I'll say on this is this is why the power of state AGs and federal enforcers is so important, because we need investigations. They have the ability to get internal documents that obviously, ordinary businesses as market players can't get. And we really need to see more investigations into this to kind of uncover just how widespread this is and where we have cases that need to be brought.
Katie, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, adding to the end of that, I would reiterate that's why it is so important to talk to your government enforcers, because government enforcers have the ability to subpoena documents even before they file a lawsuit that private plaintiffs don't. So they have that authority, that what's actually a very, very powerful tool to use to investigate this and figure out what is actually happening. And you can talk to them and they can talk to you. And so I think that's incredibly important. A few other things to look for for the retailers who are out there, if you're sort of adding to what Stacy said, if you are having to go to Costco to buy what you are selling to your customers, that probably means that there's some sort of discriminatory pricing happening. If you're seeing promotions like flyers promoting products with some sort of instant rebate or coupon that you aren't able to provide and that you don't have, or if you've asked your supplier for that type of coupon and they won't give it to you and you see it offered by another store, that's another indication that something more nefarious is happening. So look for those sorts of practices out there when you're negotiating with your suppliers.
Those are the signals we want to look out for, and then convince our state AGs to start investigating with their tools and powers. So this next one is for Katie from Mark. As an independent pharmacy, how do I know what the big box pharmacies are paying for generic and brand name drugs, and how do I get their pricing? How do I tackle PBMs with the current laws?
Ooh, that's a really great question. So first of all, I would say if you haven't reached out to NCPA, that's the National Community Pharmacists Association, you should, because they are very, very on top of this issue. They know what's happening out there. There are a number of lawsuits that local pharmacists are bringing right now against the PBMs, challenging various practices that are hurting you guys. So that's the first thing I would do, honestly, is reach out to them. I don't know the answer off the top of my head of how you find out what prices other pharmacies are getting, but NCPA will, and we can certainly help you get in contact with them if you haven't talked to them before. They're really, really smart people and they know what's happening in your industry.
Thank you. This one is for Katie and then Stacy from Robert. We've seen a lot of big box stores selling books before the official release date set by the publishers. Is this illegal? If so, what can be done?
Ooh, that's so here we're getting into like, when is the supply available to you? I don't know. That doesn't necessarily fall strictly under the Robinson-Pacman Act. Probably it's not necessarily discriminatory pricing, but if you're unable to, if there are different antitrust laws that apply when you're talking about suppliers collectively agreeing to provide a product to one business for resale and not to another. There's rules about boycotts. There's rules about refusal to what we call refusal to deal that could potentially implicate. So it's certainly something worth thinking about and exploring.
Stacey, anything to add on that?
Uh, no, I think that covers it well. And I will just underscore what Katie mentioned earlier is that, you know, the law does cover situations where a supplier is using kind of a back doorway of giving a discount. So it could be through providing advertising dollars, marketing dollars to a larger retailer that they're not providing on equal terms to smaller retailers. You know, those kinds of hidden ways that they can pass along those better deals. And does get at some of the differences in terms. But there are gaps in the law that we would love to see closed at some point. And I think one of the things that's exciting about seeing some states actually take up legislation in this area, and states already in some cases do have price discrimination laws, is that they have an opportunity to go further. And I think a lot of folks are kind of looking around, you know, for example, in Rhode Island and Minnesota, looking at issues with communities lacking grocery stores and looking at what's happening to farmers and producers because they're being squeezed by these big retailers and just the kind of cascade of harms. So I'm really excited to see some of those state efforts move forward.
I'm really glad you said that. It makes me think of, you know, the states and unfair competition laws that are really a very intentional. Unfair competition is an intentionally vague term we use in the law to talk about tactics that disadvantage companies and retailers and consumers that aren't traditional antitrust violations like price fixing and that sort of thing.
Thank you both. So the next question, this is for Stacey. Critics of price discrimination enforcement. So there's all of us in our movement to revive the Robinson-Patman Act and find these more fair markets. There's a lot of people working against this in the policy space. So critics of price discrimination enforcement claim it will raise prices for consumers. How will enforcement impact consumer prices?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can, one of the things we can see is this decades of non-enforcement has left consumers really vulnerable. And in fact, we are seeing prices go up right now. You know, in my view, the key to protecting consumers' interest is to have a lot of competition, right? If you've got lots of choices, lots of different stores that are available to you, it makes it very hard for any one of those stores to inflate their prices and take advantage of you or otherwise sort of take advantage of consumers because you're going to go somewhere else. The reality is that lots of people live in places where they really don't have a lot of alternatives. People feel like, I don't have any place to go to buy this thing. I have to buy it from Amazon. Walmart has more than 50% market share in over 40 metro areas. If you think about what that means, there are neighborhoods and communities within those metro areas where functionally the only option is either to shop at Walmart for your groceries or to drive across the metro area half an hour to get to another grocery store, which isn't really an option. And so the dominance of these retailers really means that they can have the ability to raise prices. And we saw it, you know, quite dramatically in the last few years where, you know, they essentially used inflation as a kind of cover story for what in fact was the reality that there's not enough competition left in the market. And we saw many of these companies take increased profits. And so in other words, they were raising their prices above what they actually needed to. And were able to get away with it because their customers didn't have any other alternative. And I want to just add a dimension to this that's actually really crucial, is that when we've had this consolidation among the retailers, one of the things that triggered over the last couple of decades is lots of consolidation among the suppliers. Because the big major grocery suppliers, the big publishers, they were like, oh, we got to bulk up because we have to negotiate against Walmart. We have to negotiate against Amazon. We got to be bigger. in this scenario. And so we saw a ton of mergers entirely driven by the exercise of retail power and the mergers among suppliers. And so this problem of price gouging is two levels now. There, among the grocery chains, yeah, you walk down the aisle and you see all these different brands, but those brands are owned by just a few companies. And those companies, like, there is not functional competition at that level. And so they also have had really inflated prices. So you basically have these two middlemen that are profiting enormously, and you have producers, farmers, authors, small publishers, everybody else on one side, and then you have consumers on the other, and we're both paying a price.
Thank you, Stacy. And this is going to be our last question we have time for. We are taking note of all of your questions, and we'll work to provide answers on those in follow-up. So this question is, how do we get accountability for the big retailers who are bullying suppliers into illegal deals? Does the legal system only have the power to hold the supplier accountable? What about Congress? Is there anything they can do? So whoever would like to speak to this one.
I can chime in. So to answer your question, like, directly, the Robinson-Patman Act provides for a cause of action against buyers who induce lower prices. So yes, there is absolutely existing mechanisms for going after what we call power buyers who have been able to extract these advantageous terms from their suppliers. It's a little bit harder to prove because of the inducement requirement, but it is there. In California, I know that California state laws also provide for causes of action against suppliers. And I think you've really hit the nail on the head there with that question. With power buyers, that is, that they are often the culprit in a much more significant way than your supplier is. As Stacy was talking about earlier, the suppliers are often hamstrung. They don't have much of a choice when somebody who accounts for 25% or more of their sales says, "Give us these terms or we're going to go somewhere else."
I could add just a bit of a dimension to that. I think that there are definitely suppliers who there's a power differential there for sure, and the big retailers are more powerful than the suppliers. But I think there is also what has evolved, at least in some sectors, is a kind of symbiotic relationship where basically, as a big grocery supplier, if you do Walmart's bidding, if you make sure that Walmart stays on top, they're going to look after you, and you're going to get to dominate your little sector, and you're going to get some of the spoils of that. And so, you think about these big companies, General Mills, PepsiCo, these major suppliers, Procter and Gamble, their offices are filled with staff who get up every day, and their job is to figure out how to make sure Walmart's on top. That's what they're oriented towards. They're not oriented towards the rest of the market. And they get something as companies out of that relationship. And so, as I said, I think there's actually a bit of a symbiotic relationship going on in terms of how this works. Functionally, it's often easier to, and I mean, Katie can speak more to this, but functionally, it's often easier to go after the supplier. Because you, in the case of the buyer, you have to demonstrate that they knowingly received better deals. Like, there's a sort of level of intent that is a little bit more tricky to prove. And so functionally, when you look back at how this law was historically enforced, when it was very vigorously enforced, it often meant sort of nipping in the bud supplier discrimination and just keeping suppliers in line and saying, it is your job to create a fair playing field, and we are looking over your shoulder. And I think that kind of enforcement we'd love to see come back.
Thank you. Wonderful. There were lots of questions we weren't able to get to, but please use the form we've shared in the chat and that we'll send in the email to ask those questions, and we're happy to get them answered for you. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers and the small business owners for tuning in today during the holiday season while you are facing a mountain of obstacles to serve your communities. We're very aware. And a huge thanks to our co-hosts today, the American Booksellers Association, the American Independent Business Alliance, American Specialty Toy Retailing Association, Cambridge Local First, Independent Natural Food Retailers Association, the Independent Shopkeepers Association in Oklahoma, Institute for Local Self-Reliance, Local Business Institute, Local First Arizona, Local Return, Louisville Independent Business Alliance, I hope I said Louisville right, Low Country Local First, National Community Pharmacists Association, National Grocers Association, Small Business Majority, and Spokane Independent Metro Business Alliance. And so that's it for today. Really great conversation. To create this change, we need your help. We need your stories. So please fill out the form that we've shared, and we'll send to you an email. And we will also send out the recording in the following days if you'd like to share with anyone. You can find future events from Small Business Rising through our newsletter or on our website. And be well and have a very successful holiday season. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.